start adhering to. Thank you.
I call the honourable member Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and it's a pleasure to address this notice of motion in the House today. And I do want to say at the outset how much we in the opposition benches appreciate the work of the Officers of Parliament. As my colleague Chris Hipkins has just said, essentially the work that we're talking about here, particularly of the Office of the Ombudsman and the Auditor-General, is about the transparency of government. It's about the accountability of government, critical elements in our democracy. And the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment also playing, as my colleague Kennedy Graham has noted, a very important role in making sure that issues of a fundamental nature to our lifestyle in New Zealand are raised inside this Parliament. I noted with interest Rahui Katane's comments around the possibility of an Officer of Parliament to deal with treaty-related issues. From time to time these ideas arise. Another one that's been debated in this Parliament recently has been the question of whether the Chief Archivist should be an Officer of Parliament, particularly given the changes that the current government has made to bring Archives New Zealand inside the Department of Internal Affairs. And I can absolutely understand both the point that Rahui Katane has made and those that want to see something like the Chief Archivist brought in as an Officer of Parliament because of the independence that being an Officer of Parliament provides, because it is a fundamental check on government. And when we have constitutional roles, like something to do with the treaty or like archives, they play such an important part in our constitutional and democratic infrastructure, Mr Speaker. I think those ideas are worthy of consideration because we do need that independent check within our unicameral system that we have here, and the Officers of Parliament play an excellent role on this. There is, of course, a limit to what we can cover under an Officer of Parliament type role, and I'm not necessarily agreeing with the proposal that Rahui Katane has put up, but I do think when we look at our overall democratic infrastructure, we need to look seriously at the role that Officers of Parliament can play. Mr Speaker, the officers that we're dealing with today in this particular notice of motion, as has already been pointed out, are the Ombudsman's Office, the Auditor-General and the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. My colleague Chris Hipkins has just finished talking at some length about the Ombudsman's Office. I just want to add a couple of points to that. I want to re-emphasise it's always quite easy to look at statistics in different ways, and the Minister who introduced the motion today was proudly stating the difference in terms of the number of complaints involving ministers. But as my colleague Chris Hipkins has pointed out, 920 complaints about the Official Information Act in the last year of the annual report for the Ombudsman, up from 809. So that is 111 extra complaints about the Official Information Act. And I think at a time at which there has been a review of the Official Information Act, that this is something that the government should be taking seriously. Its responsibilities to adhere to the law as it stands today and ensure that information is available as freely as is possible. And those delays, Mr Speaker, in responding to the Official Information Act request is nothing to be proud of, Mr Speaker. It is something that we need to do far better on. It is something where technology should allow us to be far better. I do note also in the annual report of the Ombudsman that over half of the overall complaints dealt with by the Ombudsman relate to the Department of Corrections. And I think we're about to see in the budget next week, Mr Speaker, the Department of Corrections become our largest government department. Therein lies the government's economic plan, Mr Speaker, to make corrections the largest government department. I think that shows that there are some priorities wrong in our society. I think we need to ensure that, in fact, the Department of Corrections is not our largest department, that we do not have to build ever more jails in this country and ever more complaints finding their way to the Ombudsman's office. In relation to the review of the Official Information Act, Mr Speaker, it would be good to know from the government when we will see a response to the Law Commission's report on this topic. It is a very good report. Sir Geoffrey Palmer released it last year. It's called The Right to Know. And it is a very important thing because the Official Information Act, coming as it did in 1982, did not foresee the internet. It did not foresee the way in which information is now distributed in our society. And while the fundamentals of the Official Information Act, as the report notes, are sound, there are a number of things that could be done to improve it. And I want to mention one of those now, Mr Speaker, and that's the issue of the proactive disclosure of information. I strongly believe that this is something that government agencies can do far better. I simply cannot see why, when a major decision is announced after a cabinet decision, the relevant documents are not released at that time. Now, they will still be subject to the withholding requirements within the Official Information Act, but the fact is they could be disclosed when an issue is formally announced, when a decision is announced by the Cabinet. I think that would actually increase people's confidence and trust in the institution of government. It would also save a lot of wasted time for people who make requests for Cabinet papers and background documents, that they be released at that time. I believe that's the kind of open government that any party should want to be part of, because it will increase the confidence of the public in our decision-making process. Obviously, the role of technology can assist here. We do have the situation now where emails, tweets, text messages are now part of the record of government, and ensuring that we have an act that makes sure that they are captured where that is appropriate is important, and obviously there are recommendations within the review about that. The review also makes another important recommendation, Mr Speaker, which I'd like to think the government could implement soon, and that's the question of the overuse of the provision of saying that information will soon be publicly available, and then a long period of time lapsing before that information is actually released. I believe, and this is not simply confined to this government, that stating that information will soon be publicly available is being used as an excuse by government, and it is not in line with the spirit of the legislation. And there is some recommendation in the Law Commission's report around tightening that up, because I don't believe that will increase the trust and confidence of the public. So, Mr Speaker, I think that the review of the OIA is an important part of the ongoing work of the Ombudsman's Office. On this side of the House, we strongly support the Ombudsman's Office in the work that they're undertaking, but we do need to ensure that the legislation that they administer is appropriate to the modern times, and I would encourage the government, Mr Power, before he leaves us, to be able to give us some response around, I don't mean today, Mr Power, but before he leaves us generally, some response on what we can do to ensure that the Official Information Act meets the requirements of the modern age and the Ombudsman's Office are able to implement it. The other aspect of this notice of motion that I wanted to refer to today, Mr Speaker, is to the work of the Office of the Controller and Auditor General. And we know that the National Party's kept the office busy. We know that, Mr Speaker. We've had Pansy Wong and her husband Sammy Wong. We've had Phil Heatley's ministerial credit card. We've had Bill English's use of his ministerial home. So the office has been kept busy. So it's a good thing today to be able to say, yes, the National Government contributing to economic growth in this country. The Auditor General Office needs a bit more money because the National Party's been keeping them so busy. And actually the Auditor General has a number of other important inquiries which would be nice to see them make progress on. They've recently reported, I might say, on after-hours medical treatment in New Zealand, a very important issue. And within that report, they have made note of the fact that accessibility and affordability of after-hours medical treatment is a major issue in New Zealand and is not getting better under this government, Mr Speaker. But there are other reports coming to us in 2011-12 from the Office of Auditor General. There's one on public-private partnerships. Now that'll be interesting. Public-private partnerships and the risks for New Zealand's public sector. Well, the main risk around public-private partnerships for New Zealand comes from the national government wanting to get in, opening up schools and the health system to the private sector, pushing and privatising core government responsibilities, and I look forward to the report of the Auditor General on the risks of that to New Zealand, because we know there are many, particularly under a national government, determined to privatise within education, within health and within the correctional system. We've also got a follow-up on on-tracks maintenance. That's important because we need to look back and show when National privatised our rail system, how poor the infrastructure became, and how when it was brought back, enormous amounts of money had to be invested because privatisation of that core government asset did not work, Mr Speaker. So I congratulate the work of the Officers of Parliament. They do an excellent job for us. We need to ensure that they are able to keep up their work, keep up with modern technology and keep up with the devious actions of this national government.